Hello everybody, this is Quentin Figueroa here with Crowd Freedom, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the legal system in a free society. And this is a little bit of a tricky thing for a lot of people to wrap their heads around. I know when I first started looking into this stuff, it was the one thing that kind of, I guess you could say I struggled with, because most of the parts of a free society are kind of straightforward and easy to deal with. Like if you're talking about privatizing education, that's pretty easy to figure out how to do and to do it outside of government. If you're talking about the healthcare system, if you're talking about lots of things, it's easy to kind of understand how that would happen in a free society. Even something like roads or military even, people still might kind of be able to wrap their heads around. But when you bring in the legal system, sometimes it gets a little bit tricky because we're not raised to think about doing law and courts and that kind of thing in a voluntary, non-coercive way, right? How are you going to take care of bad people when you can't use force? So it's a tricky situation if you don't really explore it or put much thought into it. But I think the more as I discuss this, it should hopefully shed some light on a few of these pieces and maybe hopefully help you look at it in a different way. So that's what we're going to do. Now, we have to understand that obviously the government currently controls the entire legal system in every society. Yeah, there might be some free market things like attorneys and, different supplemental pieces to the actual legal framework, but at the core, the entire legal system, you have courts, you have police, and you have the actual law itself. All these pieces are part of the government, and there isn't an alternative way to do that in governments right now. Each government kind of has their own set of laws and their own framework that they create, but they basically have a monopoly on that system, and it's currently controlled by the government. So we're looking to do it outside of the government without coercive force. So when doing this, you have to understand that it doesn't have to work the way that it currently does. With most free market things, the market it's dynamic. It will come up with the best way to do what needs to be done, and that might not be the way, and it probably isn't the way that it already is working. So just because we have courts right now does not mean that we will have courts in a free society. There might be a better way to do the mediation that courts provide. There might be a better way to do that in a free society, and if that was the case, then the free society would do it that way. So we have to look at it that way. It's just because the way it's being done right now doesn't mean that's the way it would be done in a free society. And if you understand how markets and government work in general, you would know that markets are basically better at everything than government. So if it's being done the way government's doing it right now, then it's probably being done in a very poor fashion. And I think most people would agree that the legal system in at least America, but I mean pretty much in everywhere in the world, the legal systems are they could have a lot of work done to improve them. And people aren't overall too happy with the legal systems. And legal systems are basically 100% government controlled, so that should tell you something. Where you have a free market thing like the internet or technology, that's pretty much free market, and nobody complains about technology for the most part, or the internet, or those kind of things. They complain about things government controls, like court systems and that kind of stuff. So yeah, we have to understand that. And if it is kind of problematic or hard to figure out how to do it without government, you have to understand that every problem you're approached with in a free society is an opportunity for an entrepreneur to make money by solving it. So you might say, okay, so an obvious thing people will say is you can't use force to basically say imprison people. So if somebody does something bad, how do you take care of that crime without using force? And we'll get to that later, but just to point that out, I want to show that just because you might not be able to see it or I might not be able to see it, it doesn't mean that there isn't a creative, smart, and good way to do it to solve that problem. And whoever solves that problem is going to make money doing it, because as they solve that problem, people are going to want to purchase whatever solution they're giving. Because if it really is a problem, then people need a solution for it. And people pay money for solutions to their problems. And that's the whole cornerstone too of free society, and that's what makes it so beneficial, and it's what raises people's standard of living who live in more free societies. So that's an important thing to understand. Every problem is an opportunity to make money solving it. And pretty soon, if you solve more and more problems, there's less problems to solve, and everybody is living better lives because of that. So there's a few components to the legal system I want to cover. So we have law as one of them. We have crime. We have police. We have courts. And then we'll have reputation and prisons. So I'm going to go through all of these kind of pieces and just give you a little bit of an overview on how they would work. And now keep in mind, this is just my take on it. I'm not an expert in any of this, but I have put a lot of research and thought into it. And I've read a lot of free market thought by people like Murray Rothbard and these kind of people. So I have a pretty good understanding of how it could work, but obviously there's an infinite number of ways that it could work. And if I were to propose the way it would work in a free society, as I'm sure many of you are familiar, that would be an argument for centralized control, which is what government does. So I'm not here saying this is how it would work, because that's just me basically saying we need to have something that is done exactly the way I see fit. I'd rather have the market put all of its efforts together to come up with the best solution. But this is just me as somebody who is into this type of thing and studies it. This is my take on how it would work. So, and I'm going to go with most of the current legal system that we have, because that's what we're more familiar with. Okay, so with law, I'm going to read to you a quote by Frederick Bastiat. And then he says this: "Life, liberty, and property do not exist because men have made laws. On the contrary, it was the fact that life, liberty, and property existed beforehand that caused men to make laws in the first place." So I really like this quote, because I think he's saying the opposite of how most people view law. And he's saying it in a way that is in alignment with the foundation of a free society, and that foundation is property. Because everything in a free society is tied to property. That is the essence of a free society: property and the property rights that derive from that, and the non-aggression principle that ties into property ownership. So what Bastiat's saying is, most people view it where the law is determined ahead of hand, and that tells you what's your property. But he's saying you have property, and the property that you have determines the law. So that's like saying you as an individual, you are property, right? And as an individual, you determine your law, because you're an individual and you are property. So somebody else is not determining your law. You are determining your law, because the law derives from property, not the other way around. And it's obviously the same thing if you extend outside of humans. Any type of property, whether it's a human, a car, a house, whatever. So that is something that is a little bit different than the way we normally look at law, but it's in alignment with a free society, and it's a very important thing to think about and consider. Now, if there was, because the way it works in a free society is there's not going to be one particular law. It's more based around common law, which is more of a free market type of law. That's more how society as a whole will view law, and different societies might have different laws, and there isn't a right law or wrong law to have. It's a lot like, so it's based around property, right? And if you go to somebody else's house, which is their property, they might have different rules for how they do their house than you do at your house, or somebody else does at their house. Different people, different houses, different property has rules for that property. And part of a free society is you you considering the property rights of others. And as a society, these people living in the society, they're all going to have their own property, and they're all going to have kind of the rules on how they manage that. But of course, they're going to come up with common law, right? Common laws for everybody. They're going to come up with common rules that they all kind of agree on. Of course, the foundational part is the non-aggression principle. In order to have law, in order to have property, you can't have that property aggressed against. So the foundation for property is non-aggression. If you own something and somebody can aggress and steal it, then it's no longer your property and you no longer own it. So you have to have the non-aggression principle. And I'm sure there are some other things that society would come up with and determine to be part of kind of that law of society, the common law that people use. So yeah, let's continue with this. The goal in the free society, it's not to come up with the right law, it's to basically come up. So we want to create a society with the most freedom, and freedom is choice. So the more choice people have to do things, the more free they are. And in order to have more choice, you have to have less laws. When you have a lot of rules or a lot of laws, you're taking away that choice. So you want to come up with foundational rules and laws that will allow for maximum choice, which is maximum freedom. And in order to do that, that's why we would base it around property. And a lot of things derive from property. So say for instance, somebody is polluting in another person's yard. Now this is a question of property. So the person polluting, they have property of that pollution, and then the person's yard who has it being polluted, they have property. So you're dealing with two pieces of property. If somebody was to, a more obvious example, somebody was to murder another person, you're dealing with property. One person aggressed on another person's property, right? Somebody steals something. I mean, all disputes come to property for the most part, and that's where this property piece is foundational to how law would work in a free society. So it's fairly clear that the more foundational we can get with laws, the better. Rather than doing something like what we do now, where we say different ages might, be okay or not okay to do certain things. Like you can gamble at 21, you can drink alcohol at 21, you can smoke at 18, you can go to war at 18, you can, different things, right, at different ages. This is more the opposite of what Bastiat's talking about. These are focusing on law first and then property second. You need to focus on property first and law of that property next, right? So the whole this age thing or that kind of thing, I discussed it in another video, but it's falling into this same line of thinking where is the person showing self-ownership, which is showing ownership of property of yourself. So is this person showing self-ownership? And then if that's the case, then that property owner is able to do that particular thing. So it's coming down to property again with, all these things that we already have arbitrary rules for. So rather than saying this, you can do this bad, this age on this sex can only do this, these kind of people can only do this, you have to be this to do this, you get rid of that and you just say, we're going to do it all based around property. And then when you're actually determining whether or not property is, when you're actually mediating on the correct ruling for something, you base it on property and you let institutions like courts or whatever else rule based around that. Okay, so yeah, if there was to be, like, say, a constitution in a free society or something like that, it would be property. I mean, property is the foundational part of a free society. So let's move on. So this is obviously a shift in the way we do it now, and it's a shift in power. You can't be hurt by what other people do. We in a free society, that doesn't allow for aggression. This is something that we kind of, we don't think about much because we're so used to doing it the way we do it in our societies, it's kind of confusing. We want to create laws that basically rule in a way that people can't hurt us. So to give kind of a convoluted example, let's say, like somebody might be a little bit upset about drug use, or, yeah, let's go with drug use, because they say that when you're doing drugs, it might lead you down a path where you might end up in a prison, or you might end up in trouble with the law, or you might be less productive in society, or all these things which are what people would view as coming back to hurt them as a taxpayer. And I think there is an argument to that, where people want to use laws, this is in a state society, people want to use laws to basically enforce their will on others to make sure that others don't do something that would later cost them more or hurt them more. Now, this is different in a free society, because in a free society, people can't hurt you. There aren't taxes that people making poor decisions can then voice on you, right? You are independent of the choices of others in a free society. So if people are making decisions that you don't view as favorable to yourself, you don't need to make a law to try to keep them from doing that, because you don't want to down the future have to pay for them or their children or something on welfare or whatever it is, because of choices and consequences that they've accrued to themselves. So in this regard, in a free society, you don't need to worry as much about creating the right law or any of these types of creating laws that you can force on people and having them to where they can't hurt you, because people can't hurt you in a free society and they're free to do what they want. So it's a really great thing, and it's a good thing to think about. Now, crime is a little bit different too. Let me start off with a quote by Murray Rothbard on crime, which is a good overview. So Murray Rothbard says, quote, "Moreover, in the system of criminal punishment in the libertarian world, the emphasis would never be, as it is now, on society's jailing the criminal. The emphasis would necessarily be on compelling the criminal to make restitution to the victim of his crime. The present system, in which the victim is not recompensed, but instead has to pay taxes to support the incarceration of his own attacker, would be evident nonsense in a world that focuses on the defense of property rights and therefore of the victim of crime." So this is another piece that is quite different than the way we handle law right now. So because law and crime in a free society is going to be based around property, it comes down to victims and people who have had their property aggressed against. So that's kind of what I was just talking about earlier, where if somebody's doing drugs, they are not aggressing against your property. They are making decisions for their own property, for their own body, right? So somebody owns themselves, they choose to take drugs, and perfectly fine in a free society because there is no victim. Nobody is being injured. Even if, let's say, drugs were damaging to somebody, which there are lots of arguments for that, right? Dangerous drugs and that type of thing. So even if somebody is taking dangerous drugs, or they're cutting themselves, or they're doing something harmful to themselves, that's their own property, and people can do what they want with their property. If I own a car and I throw rocks at my car, or I break the windows of my car, that's my property, and I can do what I want with it. Nobody's going to complain. But if I go to somebody else's car and I start bashing in the windows, then we have a problem, because it's just a violation of somebody else's property. So Murray Rothbard is talking about crimes and the victims. And this is basically talking about property. And if there is a victim, then you are creating a crime. If there's no victim, then there's no crime. So that's why you have this whole victimless crimes piece, which is so important and talked about in free societies, because right now with governments, there are crimes where there are not victims, but they're still considered crimes, which is absolutely absurd. And it creates huge distortions, because you're creating criminals that aren't criminals. You're taking choices that people make, and you're saying that these choices mean you're a criminal, even though you're not aggressing against anyone else, and even if it's a choice for yourself. We're taking away freedom for people to do what they want on their own property, which is just not, it's not the best way to do it, and that's not the way it would work in a free society at all. You're taking away choice, and you're hurting people by making them do it one way and not allowing for another way. You're foisting your opinion on them rather than letting everybody have their own opinion. So in this regard, if you were to look at something like war, so it comes down to, well, war is different. War isn't going to happen in a free war. You're aggressing against somebody else, so that there's a victim, and you're creating a crime by aggressing on somebody else if you're doing war or murder or attacking somebody. Self-defense, so that's different, right? So the non-aggression principle is called the non-aggression principle because it has to do with aggression, which is initiating an act. Now, there's a defensive part to property, and if somebody is aggressing on your property, you can defend it because that's how you claim ownership of property. If you didn't ever defend your property, then it wouldn't be property that you own because anybody could freely come and take it and use it and that kind of thing. So you have to obviously be able to defend your property. And that's where self-defense would totally be fine in a free society. So if somebody comes up and tries to shoot you, you could shoot them, and it's perfectly justifiable in a free society. You are doing self-defense, you were not the initiator, and they were the initiator, initiating against your force, and you were defending your they were initiating against your property, you were defending your property, totally justifiable. And of course, courts and that kind of thing would determine who was the aggressor, who wasn't. You know, you'd have to kind of investigate, figure out the parameters, as we do now in the legal system, but it would be based around the aggressor and the victim. So gambling, prostitution, drugs, all these types of things, they're based around property, and it's you kind of have to take each one on a case by case basis. But there's obviously lots of things that can be done to make it more kind of general for society as a whole, so it's not like super confusing and that kind of thing for each individual. But that's I kind of talk about that in another video where I talk about what age somebody becomes an adult. But yeah, that should give you kind of an idea on that. And it's an important thing to understand. So yeah, let's move on to now police. So police in a free society, so the way it is now, right, we all pool our money together and we pay for police to do something. And pooling your money to pay for something is a bad way to pay for things because you're not directly getting what you want. You're basically getting an aggregate of everybody's opinion, and it's just kind of stupid. It's like going to a restaurant and, you know, there's 50 people in the restaurant and you all go, okay, let's all pool our money together, order the same entree. It's stupid. Why don't you just get the entree that you want yourself individually? You know, I might want chicken, somebody else might want beef, somebody else might want vegetables. Let each person get what they want. Not everybody wants to do the same thing. And it's the same thing with any type of service in a free market. And just because we pay for things like police right now with taxes, and just because we're so used to doing that, doesn't mean it's the only way to do it. And it's definitely not. So police in a free society would be free market businesses that you purchase. And I know a lot of you might be a little bit upset that you'd be purchasing things in a free society that are already free, but they're not free currently. We pay for them with taxes. So, and if you understand economics, you'll know that things that are purchased through the government and through taxation are much lower quality and higher prices than things that are done through the free market. Free market is always going to have higher quality and lower prices. So if we want good police, we'd be better off having them in the free market. And police in a free market would not be a super class or a class above the general citizens that can do things that normal citizens can't. It's an even playing field. People are people. These police officers would be people working for a company that need to provide service to their paying customers, which would be people like you and me who are paying for their services. Now, Stefan Molyneux talks about these police agencies and they would be called, what he calls them DROs, which is a dispute resolution organization. And that is, that's one way that this could work out, where they basically, they could do a number of tasks, and it wouldn't have to be one big company that does, that kind of handles the whole legal process, including the police. It could just be like police could be a separate company. But let's look at kind of a DRO type case where you'd have it'd be a company like more of like an insurance company where you pay a monthly premium to receive service for it. So rather than paying, $1,000, $2,000 a year for police through taxes, you pay $1,000 or whatever a year for your DRO. And they provide similar services, but they don't obviously initiate force. But by not initiating force, by having a profit incentive to make people like me, the purchasers, happy, it's going to clean up police in general a lot. You're going to make it to where the focus of a DRO is much more about crime prevention. And that's kind of the whole point of having police, is to prevent crime. Everything is more cost effective if you prevent it than if you deal with it after the fact. So a DRO wants to make sure that they please the customer. And customers want to pay the cheapest amount of money for the best service. And in order to do that, DROs will need to DROs will charge less for customers that are lower maintenance. And they don't have to go to court over these customers. They don't have to clean up messes. They don't have to spend resources to cater to these customers. They want low cost customers, just like people that are getting life insurance. Younger people get cheaper life insurance than older people because they're less risk. In health insurance, you're going to get cheaper health insurance if you don't smoke, if you have better health, all these kind of things. It's the same thing with the DRO. If you are a less risky individual as far as crime goes, you're going to get cheaper service. And so if you go and take certain tests, you can prove that you're a peaceful parent. You can go and prove that you haven't committed crimes in the past. All these types of things come into effect, and it makes it extremely difficult, not extremely difficult, it makes it more expensive for people that are criminals. And it's not like you pay the same like you do right now despite what you do. Now, if you actually do crime and you do things, it's going to be more expensive for you to have police protection yourself, because you're making it more expensive for them, and they're going to want to have safe people, peaceful people that they can service, and those people are going to want to pay less, so they will be peaceful. So you're using the market, which we already use in health insurance and life insurance. You're using it in just one other way, which would be police, and it would be very efficient, and it would focus on prevention, just like health insurance focuses on prevention. And you get cheaper costs if you have better health. So that's something to understand and think about with police. So let's move on now to courts. Okay, so courts in a free society would, of course, rule on property. And courts would be a free market system. And the way courts work right now is courts right now so it's a government monopoly, and they're fairly inefficiently run. I mean, they're so bad that people, in a lot of cases, would rather just admit to being guilty than trying to actually make a case for whatever it is that they're in court for. It's just an expensive process, and unless you have a lot of money, it makes it hard for you to actually, have a legitimate case. It's funny because by having things with government, they're supposed to be better for poor people, but courts is one of the places where and the whole legal system in general is terrible for poor people. So if you care about poor people, then you're going to have a hard time supporting a governmental court system that is the worst for poor people and the best for rich people. In a free society, though, you're going to have courts ruling on property, and there could be a lot of ways to go about it. You could have it to where it's a single judge. It could be multiple judges. It could be a jury. It could be, some other like more technical way, like some internet database ledger, or things like this that are kind of not things that we ordinarily use right now. Now, courts would be competitive, and there would not only be one court or one like hierarchy of courts. There'd be different companies that provide these legal services of mediation, and it could get a little bit more technical, where different DROs, the dispute resolution organizations, these different DROs could use different courts kind of depending on their customers and that kind of thing. So let's take an example. So say you're going to start working with a bank, and they're going to manage your business and that kind of thing. So when you're going to set up and get an account opened at a bank, that's in a governmental society, you have kind of all these different checks in place that the government provides that makes people feel more secure about things, like the FDIC, where it secures your deposits, so to speak, and different things like this that the government provides that are supposed to make it so a bank can't just run out of money or collapse or that kind of thing, and you're just screwed. Now, so it's like, how would you do this in a free society without some type of institution to do this? But you would have an institution to do these types of things, or to make these types of contracts more secure. So if you look at opening a bank, when you go in to open a bank account with a company, there's going to be certain things that you are wary of, right? And again, for every problem, it's an opportunity to make money by solving it. So these DROs, or any other business that wants to solve it, is going to have already solved these problems, or they will be solving them, because it's a concern for people. And so if you're concerned that a bank might run off with your money, what you would do ahead of time is create a contract with them, and they would have their dispute resolution organization or their company representing them. You would have yours, right? So like they have like a State Farm, you have your Geico DRO, and they would both mediate for you and create a contract saying that if they were to run off with your money, this is what would legally take place. And then if they were to run off with your money, then you would have the legal recourse to, initiate that motion on them. So that's something to realize, is that all these kind of hypothetical scenarios where you're nervous about something bad going on, you create a contract for that. You and your DRO work to resolve that type of thing ahead of time. So if it does happen, you have legal recourse, and you work with it until it's favorable to both parties. And it makes it to where, a bank, in order to get new customers, they're going to have to prove this to people. They're going to have to make people feel secure and safe about putting their money there. And if they don't, then somebody else will open a bank that does. And that's what the free market does. And that's why competition in a free market is so beneficial to everybody in society, because you keep optimizing things over and over again until you get them really efficient, and you work out all the bugs. So that's how that type of thing would work. You'd have contracts ahead of time, and so of course you're not going to know all the little details on the tricks that these businesses might try to pull on you, right? Like, you're not going to know that they might be able to do some interest rate on you that screws you, or a business might be able to take off, or they might be able to put your money somewhere else and you might not have access to it, or any type of business, they'll have kind of things that might be gray or shady to you that you don't want to have happen, but you're just an average person, you don't know what's going on, you just want to make it easy. That's where the DRO comes in. They do all that technical crap, they figure it all out, they read the details, they know it, and this kind of thing will become very normal and worked out to where when you're doing something, your DRO is already representing you and already kind of got these details worked out. It's not like you have to know everything yourself. That's what the DRO does. And if the DRO doesn't know everything for you, then you find a better one. And if there's not a better one, you create a better one, or I create a better one, somebody creates a better one and makes a lot of money doing it, because every problem opportunity to make money by solving it. So that's how that would work. You have property as a main part to courts, and then you have contract law. So these two things, property and contracts, and they're both basically, contracts are, on property, and property is very foundational to a free society. So like we talked about before, all these types of different disputes in a court system, you just have a private company that is trying to find out who the aggressor is and who the victim is, and they're determining, how the ownership of the property in all these freaking different cases come together, and which person is telling the truth. All these kind of things courts do, and because they're in a free market system and they're competitive, they're going to be really, really good at getting to the bottom of things, because that's what competition does. You get really good, you have an incentive to provide the best service to your customers in a free market, and if you don't, you go out of business. Right now, courts can't go out of business, and courts are terrible. I mean, it's so obvious. The whole legal system right now is really bad, and that's one of the main areas in society that the government controls completely. The government has a monopoly on police, on courts, on law, on prisons, on all of these pieces of society. They're using violence to enforce that monopoly, and we wonder why it's so bad. Where all these other places in society, we don't have government, are doing so well for us. We don't have a big problem trying to find a new pair of shoes because government isn't trying to determine how to handle that process for us. We don't have a big problem trying to figure out how to get information about something because the internet and Google, they got that covered. And we wouldn't have a big problem settling disputes between things if we didn't have government, because whatever company it would have been or will be, they got us covered. But right now they can't have us covered because they're not legally allowed to offer such a service. The worst system right now is the court system, the legal, there's other bad systems like money, but these systems are bad. And these systems are completely controlled by government. Money is bad, that's controlled by government, but that's another topic. Okay, so like we talked about earlier, these courts would work on common law, which is derived, it's free market law that is what society in general views as what the law should be, and it's based around property and these types of things. Different free societies could obviously do courts differently. They could do anything differently. The main thing of a free society is maximum choice, property, non-aggression. It's very straightforward. It's property. Property is everything, and from property you have non-aggression, and from non-aggression you have the most freedom to choose what you want to do, and we want to allow people to choose. That's the whole point of freedom, is choice, being able to do what you want to do. Right now in government societies, you can't do what you want to do. So we're getting to prisons. We're almost there. Now, so in line with courts and this whole free market thing for legal, we're talking about something we don't really talk about a lot in government societies, at least in a legal sense, and that is reputation. Reputation in a free society becomes very, very important because that is kind of what you have to go off of determining people and whether or not you want to do business with them. So if you want to go start a savings account with a bank, you're viewing them on a number of things, but a main one is their reputation. So rather than having the government tell you that this is some approved bank that is safe to work with, you determine yourself whether it is, and your DRO or any other type of business working with you can help you determine that. And it's going to allow more freedom of choice on who you want to bank with. But it's going to come down to the reputation of them though, right? And whether or not you want to work with them. And yet, if you're a new bank, it's going to be harder to get customers because you don't have a reputation. So you might have to charge less for them, for your customers. You might have to do more for them. That's business, and that's what competition is. And if it's too hard for you to be a new bank, then that means the banking industry is really good. and you should probably be in another industry. And I mean, okay, so if every industry it's hard to start a business in, that's a really good thing. That means that there's not many problems in society and you have a really high standard of living. But anyway, so yeah, it comes down to reputation, and it's not just for businesses, it's obviously for individuals also. So if you have like a criminal, right, and they've done some really bad stuff, that's going to be known about, because it's going to be important to know who are the guys that do things that society doesn't like, right? Society is not going to like guys going around raping little girls. They're going to come down really, really, really hard on that. So that's going to be known who the people are that do this. And there's going to be a profitable business to create to handle these types of things, to inform people who are doing certain actions and organizing it in a way so people can determine which actions are unfavorable to themselves and how can they not participate with these people in society. Okay, so now this, so one other thing is you choose your risk in a free society. So right now we can't do business with certain people in the current society if they don't have, certain criteria. For instance, I can't work with a medical doctor if they don't have a certain license, depending on what the procedure is. I can't go into business as a medical institution unless I have a license or some government type thing, right? Or lawyers, different things. There's these certifications that people need to have, which is fine, and that's good and all. But the problem is, if you don't have a certification, people should still be allowed to choose to work with you. Again, people should be determining their risk rather than somebody else, like the government, determining what's best for you. You should be allowed the freedom to make whatever transaction you want and to carry whatever risk you want. You shouldn't have somebody else telling you the risk that you can take. If there's a doctor out there that's 3 times cheaper to take care of my broken leg than another doctor that has a license and a higher reputation or whatnot, if there's some new doctor on the block and he's not licensed and he's willing to do it for 3 times less, and I'm comfortable with doing it with him, if I might know his family, I might be close to him in other ways, I might just know kind of how to assess this situation in a way that is people quite, might not want to do the homework to assess it the way I am, I should be able to take that risk. Even if he's dangerous, I should be able to take that risk. I should be able to have the choice to do what I want to do in a free society and to work with who I want to work with. So if somebody's not meeting criteria, and there would be agencies to have certain criteria for different jobs like medical, but I mean, if he didn't have a license, but he had, a 99% rating on some review website, then I'm going to go with him. If, I've heard other stories from customers of his and they like him, but he's not licensed, I don't care. I'm going to work with them. And I should be able to, because free society is about giving me that choice. Okay, so in regards to reputation, we can now jump into prisons. So prisons in a free society would, they'd be similar, I guess you could say, to how they are in a state society, but they're different in that you can't initiate force. So this is where it really kind of confuses a lot of people, because if you can't initiate force on somebody and they just killed your brother, do you just handle it, and what do you do? Now if you do something to them, are you now initiating force on them? So it creates kind of it creates a big problem for most people, and I get it. So this confused me for a while too, and so what you do is you ostracize them. And ostracization means that you cut this person off from society. So in order to function in society, people are going to need food, housing, they're going to need basic elements to survive. And if society doesn't like people that, let's say, rape little girls, then there's going to be some really good systems in place to make sure that people who do this are not participating in society. And it's going to be really easy to cut people like this off from society because society in general is so against it. So there's the whole prison piece, right? But if somebody does something really bad and they don't want to go to prison, then you cut them off from society. So let me back up a little bit. So when somebody does commit a crime, let's say like somebody steals my TV and I'm really upset about it, and I go and I bring a case to some legal system, like probably not a court, like something smaller, just to kind of get this resolved. And let's say that my DRO orders to their DRO that this person needs to return the TV, or else this is kind of the penalty. And then the DROs both agree to that, and they have like a mediation that agrees to that, and then that's pretty much issued to them. The person gets a notice saying they need to return the TV plus $200, and they can either do that or not do it. And let's say they do it and they give me the TV back and $200, and now I'm happy, everything's resolved, and that's the end of it. But maybe they don't want to give the TV back, right? And I can't use force on them because of the non-aggression principle. Although, as a side caveat, it could be argued that it would be self-defense for me to use force to get the TV back, but that's kind of a it's kind of a tricky case, and you might be going down a slippery slope to do that. So you're probably best not going about it that way and viewing it as he's initiated force on you, but it's not okay for you to initiate force back on them, right? But so he takes off. He has the TV still. He gets a notice saying he needs to return it plus $200 to me, but he doesn't want to do that still. So then what? Well, so then, you know, he might start having his bank account shut down. He might start having different things take place. People might stop doing business with them. You know, different companies now are going to be looking out for people like this. Obviously, this is the TV is like a small case. He's probably just going to accrue interest or something for a while. He's going to get some notifications. The prices of his DRO are going to go up and that kind of thing. But if it wasn't a TV, if it was something like he murdered somebody or he raped a little girl, it is going to be way more severe. And he is going to start having bank accounts locked, and he's going to have, you know, people in society in general shut him off. So he's going to be like an outlaw. He's going to be living on his own and that kind of thing. And you know, people ask, well, what do you do about these kind of people, especially if they're, you know, maybe he has like an online business, or he's able to get resources from some other government or city, you know, not too far away. And that's kind of another question and another topic, and it's kind of outside of this video. And it kind of comes down to how do you handle defense in a free society? But that's a different topic to talk about. But in the free society itself, you would cut this person off from society, and they would have to basically cut that behavior off or make restitution towards the victim to whatever they did. And this ties in again with that prevention piece that I talked about earlier with DROs. So because the penalties aren't just going to be some like prison sentence or, you know, something like this, because it's going to cut you off from society and it's going to be pretty harsh on you in that regard, you're going to have less violent people, you're going to have, less violent people, but less people who commit crimes, because you're not going to be treated as nicely as you are now. It's going to be a lot harder on you to even be a member in society. There's also lots of other kind of things that could happen with prisons. So right now, prisons, as Murray Rothbard said, the victims pay for the person who committed the crime on them. So it's like a double whammy. You got a crime committed on you, and you're paying for them to go to prison because of that. So it's like it's just a huge waste on resources in you. So if anything, the victim should be paying you to imprison themselves. It shouldn't be the other way around. You shouldn't be paying anything for somebody to hurt you and for you now to somehow take care of them because of that. It's on the person who hurt you to pay for themselves. So hopefully prisons would be more so where these people are being put to work and they're actually doing something to help the victims out that they hurt. The victims shouldn't be the people paying for these people. These people should be the people that are reaching out to the victims. So that's something else to think about with prisons in a free society. So yeah, that should hopefully give you kind of a little bit of a wider view on how all these pieces would work in a free society. I kind of covered quite a few different pieces, and hopefully it kind of just gives you an understanding on this type of thing. There's obviously a lot of ways to go about it, and this is just kind of my take on it based off what I've studied. And I mean, yeah, I think the most important takeaway is that a free society would work on, the legal system would work on property. And that's a really important takeaway to consider. Another important thing to consider is that it's going to be the free market doing everything, and that is going to increase the quality and it's going to decrease the price. It's going to increase the choice people have on different services and all this kind of thing. So that's another important point to understand. And yeah, that's basically it. The one other takeaway I'll give you, which I mentioned, is any problem in a free society is an opportunity for a business to make money by solving it. And in a legal system or in any type of industry where it's less sure kind of on how it would work, because it's kind of you're treading new territory, that's okay. And that's a place where all these kind of problems, because I know there's tons of hypothetical situations, and all of these kind of problems are opportunities for people, entrepreneurs, to solve them. And when they solve them, people will pay them, because people pay money to have their problems solved. And any problem is solvable. The whole free market system, the whole progression of civilization is innovation, markets, improving the standard of living, these kind of things. And the legal system would face this same increase in productivity and this same decrease in pricing by allowing it to operate in a free society through a free market. So hopefully that sheds some light on it, and I hope that you enjoy these videos. And if you enjoy it and you want to hear more, please subscribe to this channel, Crowd Freedom. If you want to go into a little bit more detail on this type of thing, I kind of mention it more in the book, crowdfreedom.com/book. So if you take a look there, the book's completely free. If you take a look there, it'll kind of give you a little rundown on this also. And please, yeah, comment and like this video, share it with your friends. Give me any feedback you have on it. I hope it's useful for you guys. And please join crowdfreedom.com if you want to talk about this stuff and explore it more. This is something I'm really into. So I'm looking forward to creating more videos like this and discussing these things more, and just getting it out there more for people to listen to and consider. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.